All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We are very excited to host the Grants Pass Public Safety Levy Forum. My name is Josie Malloy. I'm the president and CEO for the Grants Pass and Josephine County Chamber of Commerce. And also joining me tonight is Kate Lasky. She is the chair of our Government Affairs Committee.
Good evening, everyone.
And then I'd also like to introduce our panelists today. We have Councilor Valerie Lovelace, Councilor Vanessa Auger, and District Attorney Josh Eastman. Thank you for joining us. And tonight we'll have a list of prepared questions. And then if we have time at the end, we will be taking questions from the audience. So you can put those in the comment box and we'll get to them as we run through the evening. So let's get started with the questions. The first one up is, what does the current levy fund?
And I will take that question. So the current levy, which is $1.79, which is the same rate we've had forever, it's not a renewal. I mean, it is a renewal, it is nothing new, goes totally towards public safety. It's dedicated funding. And it's a 3-year levy we're asking for, $1.79. Current services include police and fire rescue, our response time standards, operations 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, neighborhood patrols, detectives, criminal investigations, traffic enforcement, fire protection and prevention. We have a police cadet program. We have community service officers, rogue area drug enforcement, K-9 team, community response team, school resource officers, SWAT team, chaplains, crisis negotiations teams, as well as partnerships with the 911 call center, the women's crisis support team, Hearts with a Mission, district school marshal program, Options for Southern Oregon Mental Health Services, and Choices Counseling Center. And we also help in providing services for Sobering Center. So a lot of services for $1.79.
So I can speak to the police side of GPDPS and what current levels at that 179 are. And I'll borrow Sheriff Daniels' term that we're a 3-legged stool. So the jail, we need somewhere to put people who commit crimes, commit those who commit crimes, and then the boots on the ground or patrol are the ones who arrest those who commit crimes. In addition to patrol throughout Grants Pass, there are the detectives who assist with all major crimes in the city. They also assist with major crimes throughout the county. There's detectives dedicated to the rogue area drug enforcement team, which is a partnership between us, community corrections, city and state, and there are arguably the most productive 4 detectives in the state with the amount of seizures and forfeitures and hopefully deterring people from bringing meth and heroin and other substances to Josephine County. They are a member of, again, with us and actually Jackson County it's called Socket, I think is how you pronounce it, but it's Southern Oregon Child Exploitation Team or Task Force, and their emphasis is on crimes against children utilizing electronic devices, the internet, and those. And unfortunately, that happens quite a bit. In addition, there is the team that I don't see as much because they're out there assisting people outside of the criminal justice system with getting them either sobering center, help, housing with UCAN, et cetera. That's all within police. And trying to think what else. I think I might have missed one, but I think the K-9, you mentioned the K-9s. There's dogs to help catch people who run, because some people who commit crimes run from the police. And then the city also has one K-9 who helps us, and I have several pictures of him where he's located 10 pounds of methamphetamine, a couple pounds of heroin, 28 guns. So Match is a very productive member of the GPDPS. So.
Great.
And to kind of dovetail on that, I'd like to touch on a little bit for fire and dispatch. Our public safety support records, which handle non-emergent calls, and our 911 dispatchers The last year recorded actually handled 62,000 emergent calls and about 31,000 non-emergent calls. So that'll be the first person that you talk to when you dial 911 or call the non-emergent number. And also for our fire division, they handle about 4,500 calls annually. Their most frequent calls for service are alarm calls, vehicle crashes, fires, hazardous conditions, medical help, general public services, and there's some other miscellaneous stuff that they respond to. And I think something that I want to throw out there before we move on from fire, something that's really worth mentioning that they have accomplished in the last fire season was that they were able to deploy a task force leader, overhead leadership, and firefighting resources during the initial 36 hours of the Alameda fire. And they also were able to provide incident management support in the form of an incident commander, overhead leadership, and firefighting resources to help support Illinois Valley Fire Department, Oregon State Fire Marshal's Office, Oregon Department of Forestry, and the Forest Service in the first 3 weeks of the Slater fire. So with all of these combined efforts on the Oregon side of the Slater fire, we had no loss of human life or no loss of homes.
All right, great. Thank you. We'll move on to the next question.
Yes, thank you. Our next question is, how long has the public safety levy been at the $1.79 rate?
And I'll jump off with that one just to kind of give you a heads up that all of this started back in the 1996-97 with Measure 50 when they created a permanent tax that was because people felt the taxes were out of control. And so they used the 1995 and 96, they capped it at 90% of what that tax was and put a permanent rate at $4.13. That was totally, and of course, Grants Pass totally dedicates that to public safety. Unfortunately, that only covers half of the cost of public safety. So through the years, we have had to have a levy option tax, which is $1.79 and has been $1.79 for 12 years. So then 2010 was the year that we came to $1.79, and since $1.79, it has remained the same. So all of that is also dedicated. So the $4.13 as well as the $1.79 are all dedicated for public safety, dedicated funding. Beyond that, there's about 28% of the cost of public safety that comes through our general fund, and that includes taxation for marijuana, alcohol, cigarette taxes, those sorts of things. And it also includes a part of our lodging tax. So currently 50% comes from the permanent tax, 28% comes from taxes that come through lodging tax and alcohol and other funds from the state, and 22% comes from our public levy that we are voting on $1.79. So very important that we keep that $1.79 in place. Anybody want to add anything to that?
All right, great. Thank you.
I will also add, actually, there was a point in time where we did have a jail that we service fee that we put onto our water bill. It was, I think, $3.69 for the jail back in the day. As we remember, those of you who have been here for a while, the crazy days when they were letting them out of the jail as soon as they were being arrested. So at that point in time, our city council enacted a $3.69 tax on the water bill. But as soon as we passed the levy, the council took that off. So currently that is no longer there. And then in 2008, we passed a bond levy for 2 fire stations and 3 fire engines. And that was about 50 cents per thousand, but that stopped in 2019. So there was 50 cents more per thousand on the tax bill just 2 years ago, and that has currently stopped. So now we just have the $1.79 renewal on this that goes totally to public safety.
So Valerie, it sounds like folks won't see any kind of an increase in their tax rate if they vote yes.
They will see no increase in tax rate.
All right, great, thank you. Will the $1.79 rate provide adequate funding for police and fire?
So the word adequate is difficult. I would say that to provide the current level we have is minimum staffing. I could always, the more the better for investigating and more hands to make our more serious cases. Just the more would be better. But at the current level, it is what it's often minimum staffing and is adequate, but they're running from call to call. Luckily, sometimes there's a roamer to assist with when they need more than one unit. There's dedicated units, as I mentioned, to assist with all those other areas, to partner with Greater Josephine County and even the Greater Rogue Valley on issues that affect all of us. I go back to that leg of the stool. They are the first line, and they're out there protecting the community, not only from crimes and all that, but also trying to help and remedy and do all those things. And I pulled up some numbers because I've run ours. So Grants Pass and the current levels are responsible for about half of our work, which makes sense considering Grants Pass is about half the county's population. But we average between 600 and 900 referrals from them a quarter, meaning that somewhere between 5 and 8 officers that are working at any given 12-hour shift are producing that much in a 90-day period for us. It's adequate, but they're very busy, and like I said, they're the first line in the system and that leg of the stool. So I don't know about fire. I think that's Vanessa and Val probably know about fire more than I do.
Yeah, so the $1.79 at this time is just going to continue status quo of the services that are currently offered from our Department of Public Safety. Unfortunately, our fire division has been working under staffing recommendations from the National Fire Protection Agency, from the NFPA. So they have been understaffed in that way under those recommendations. At this time, the $1.79 would be a renewal of existing services, and it would just continue status quo.
Yeah, and I will step up with that. So when we went out for the $1.89 and that did not pass, we did have to make some changes just to move forward. And we did. We very responsibly went through. We actually didn't freeze any positions for fire because we realized that they were pretty lean. We currently are operating at a lower level than most of the fire districts in the area. So we knew we were lean, and so we froze a police officer position and a record specialist position. So we did what we could to stretch it and make ourselves lean and mean, I call it. And it is sufficient. We will still be able to provide 24-hour a day, 7-day a week, 365-day service. And yes, if you call 911, you will still get a response. And that was very important to us.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is, what will happen if this levy does not pass?
So I don't know the specifics on what budget-wise and positions. I just know that, as I just mentioned, all of the current officers are busy, and if we have less of them, I would presume that they will have to triage calls for service like the county sheriff's office did prior to having enough bodies. Presumably some of those partnerships that are addressing large-scale drug trafficking organizations and child sex abuse and those sort of things that are very important, but are sort of dedicated positions that maybe they would pull back in order to focus on Grants Pass itself. And losing those would be we would be losing valuable partners in those potentially. I don't know. Again, they're the first line and they're responsible for half of my work. So if there's less out there, and that means that there's more that we're not catching, deterring, remedying, incarcerating if necessary, etc. And it's if it doesn't go through, in addition to like maybe earlier unexpected retirements, there may be more unexpected departures, and police officer is a job that doesn't just, if we lose any, you can't bring them back that quick. There's a 16-week process, a year-long training process, a probation, if we can even find individuals to come back, and that's sort of uncertain. So what happens if it doesn't pass specifically? I don't know. I know it would mean more crime would go uncaught in our area, but also that I think it would take us a long time to get back to where we are, and it took us so long to get here. So.
And I would agree with that. I would just say our response times, because obviously that's one of the things we've always prided ourselves on is our response times. It's important to us that if you call, you're going to get an answer. And we saw what happened out in the county where that didn't happen. And that's our fear. And I also have talked with a couple police officers who basically said what Josh said, that if you lose morale, number one, for the officers that are there. And then the ones that aren't there and that do end up being cut, it's really difficult to bring that back, that level of service back, because being a police officer right now is not one of the most popular lines of business to go into, number one. And then it takes a while to train them and bring them up to speed. So, when I talked with him about it, he said you would see a noticeable difference in police services.
Yeah, if I can just add to that, you guys both make some really great points. As Valerie had mentioned just a couple of minutes ago, that earlier this year, the city council conducted just short of $2 million in budget cuts to the Department of Public Safety. And we were very intentional on not losing any existing personnel and continuing the service that our community has come to expect without a noticeable difference to them. Those are two promises that we cannot make with the levy failure.
Great, thank you. Can you explain the overall funding resources for public safety?
Well, I will go back to what I said earlier, that $4.13, which was the frozen permanent tax fund, which was frozen back in 1996, is 50% of our public safety funding. And that is, dedicated totally to the police and fire. Then we also have 28%, which is like that comes down to the state, and that ends up being marijuana taxes, alcohol taxes, and a certain percentage. And we did just increase the percentage of lodging tax that will go to public safety. So those are some sources. We've also dedicated the franchise fee in our water to public safety. And so that's 28%. But 22% of it comes from the $1.79. So $1.79, without that, 22% of our financial backing would go away. And that is pretty dramatic. The total budget is about just over 26 million. That is fire and police, which is something that this city does together. Not every city does, as well as the partnerships with dispatch. And I will go on to say that the partnerships that we have will be affected. That'll be part of the first 22% to go, is our support for women's crisis support team, that sort of thing. And mental health options help. And those have taken years to develop. So that's basically where that 100% comes for. But all of those amounts are dedicated totally to police and fire.
Okay,
And
thank you.
if I may touch on that also, since you brought up women's crisis, earlier this year, the council was given some pretty interesting statistics on the services that women's crisis is able to give to the community. And I just wanted to outline some of the most surprising ways that these funds are assisting our community from the city. This is, I believe, from 2019, that 63 children were sheltered in that year, and there were over 6,000 meals served. So those are the kinds of services that maybe we're not always thinking about when we think of women's crisis, but it directly helps women and children with their everyday needs.
Thank you. Our next question. There have been some concerns regarding city spending. Could you address those concerns?
Yeah, I'll pick this one up. As it was stated previously earlier this year, the council had to work through a pretty grueling process of a $2 million budget shortfall. It was something that we began at the beginning of the year, and we spent dozens of hours deliberating over. A majority of the cuts did come from the Department of Public Safety. That was the source of that budget shortfall. And the main issue was that the operating costs were not in line with the revenue streams. So the council did their best to get those two closer aligned with that $2 million budget shortfall. And like I said previously, we did our best to, we were very intentional on not cutting any personnel and ensuring that the community, that it wouldn't be service cuts that the community would notice. Unfortunately, I'm certain that the individuals working in the Department of Public Safety noticed the cuts, but the public as a whole, they shouldn't be able to see the cuts. So a couple of the biggest things that we had to do was we did freeze 2 police officer positions, and we froze a community service officer position, a CSO position.
All right, did anyone want to add anything before we move on to the next question?
Well, I will just say, having been the person who was at one point going for $1.89, we heard the voters. I mean, there was a large turnover of counselors. The $1.89 did not pass, and we knew that it was important that we show some fiscal responsibility. So, we just got down to it. It was a difficult decision to work through, but we were able to do it. And I think we've just kind of put on hold, some spending, because we realize and recognize that we do need to be fiscally responsible.
Great, thank you. So you guys have already talked about this a little bit, but will there still be cuts to the general fund and public safety even if the levy passes at the $1.79 rate?
Well, I think I'll take this on. I think Vanessa mentioned a few things. We did freeze a police officer, a record specialist, a dispatch person, but it did reach beyond public safety. We also did a 10% cut all the way through public safety. So they're automatically running leaner. And then we took the vehicle replacement and pushed that out so that we could save money through the police, the fire, as well as the parks. And we also did freeze a parks municipal worker. So we did as much as we could to keep it in public safety, because we felt that's where, they have had the greatest increase in costs, and we recognized that and saw that. We knew that our fire was running on a shoestring as it was, and we do recognize the fire, our worry all of us have after watching what happened this last summer. So we did really want to make as few cuts, make them the least impactful. But we do know, we actually did $1.6 million worth of cuts to make it work at $1.79. So we have been told that there will be $6 million worth of cuts that we will need to make if this $1.79 does not. So I can't even fathom what that means if 1.6 was as difficult as it was for us counselors to cut.
Does anyone have anything to add before we move on? Okay, our next question. Many people have questioned why the American Rescue Plan funds, the funds for COVID relief from the federal government, coming into the city can't be used instead. Can you explain that?
Yeah, this is a great question that I am hearing more and more of. So this is a great opportunity to address that. The American Rescue Plan is one of the largest injections of federal funds into communities that we've seen in a really long time. It is such a vast program that the Department of Treasury is actually creating an additional department to help track and ensure that the resources are allocated correctly. And there are very specific rules around how these funds can be spent. So we actually won't know until May 11th what that list of rules are. So at this time, as a governing body, the city council can't begin to decide where to allocate those funds because we don't necessarily know the rules surrounding them.
I will say that the money did come down, that what I have heard, but it's general because we haven't gotten the rules, but we do know that it is meant, a lot of it for COVID, things COVID affected, because we do know that most governments have had significant stoppages and shortages of things happening. So it's anything that's COVID related, and also infrastructure meaning long-term capital projects that may have stopped or slowed down or been because of, like, the gas tax has been decreased because people weren't driving. So those sorts of things. And any responsible business, government won't take one-time funds and put them towards operating expenses, because operating expenses go on and on and on. So you use them in operating expenses, and then you come to a screeching halt, and suddenly the money's not there, and you've built up these operations that need to be funded. So obviously we have to look very closely at the best use of those funds, and I'm sure we will do that. But we don't really want them to be spent for operational. It needs to be capital infrastructure or COVID related specifically. So I will say that.
Yeah, I had actually the same question for our finance director during our budget process. Like, well, why can't we use some of that? And it's, again, that the same thing for the county and their funds is that it's for long-term investments in infrastructure and COVID related relief or nexus to COVID or losses because of that, but not operations. I presumably, I don't know, the rules again aren't there, and I'm not on the committee for the county deciding allocation of those, but presumably that the money that the counties have is for operating costs, and this is to supplement that for things that maybe not enough money or the loss of money because of COVID to kind of inject that into the economy. But I know for sure it can't be used for operating costs, because I had the same question when we were doing our budget. Well, there's a bunch of that, none of it can be used for that. So.
And I will say one thing that specifically came down, and this is just because they said no money can be put towards PERS. And of course, we do know that, any worker is going to be involved in the PERS process. So that's another reason.
Great, thank you. That was a great clarification. And just a reminder to those watching at home, you can put your specific questions in the comment box and we'll get to those. So please add them in there. So moving on to our next question, with the recent devastating fires, how important is it to have funding for fire, and will more resources be needed?
Yeah, I'd love to tackle this question. So unfortunately, those fires were a wake-up call to the new normal of our reality here in Southwestern Oregon. Oregon Department of Forestry actually considers all of Grants Pass to be an extreme fire risk. And we are surrounded by a wildland urban interface. So it's very important to have funding for fire. Our fire seasons are getting longer. We're having these historic wind events. And so ensuring that we have fire funding moving forward will ensure the safety of our community. I think one of the best examples of why it's important to have funding for fire is the Alameda fire was so devastating that regional resources were mobilizing in that area and kind of leaving their own home base, leaving themselves vulnerable because it was a historic Labor Day wind event with that previously was 100-degree, I believe we had a week of 100-degree weather, a record weather event. So it was this perfect, this perfect formula for these fires. So all of these resources left their home base. They went to the Talent Phoenix Medford area. And right here in Grants Pass, we actually had several structure and commercial fires at that same time while our firefighters had left their home base to assist with that Alameda fire. We had a fire in my ward at the Tea Time Express, and there were multiple involved structure fires at that time. So the fact that we were able to have that staff available to recall and bring back really was a make and break for our community and ensuring the safety, because fighting fire is all about time and getting there as soon as you can to get that fire out.
And I will add to that, one of the things I talked with one of the firefighters, and he mentioned that when they did go over to the fire in Alameda and were able to respond, none of the other fire districts could believe that we only had that there were only 2 people on our fire trucks, because everybody else runs a 3-person fire. I mean, we have an amazing fire department because they have been able to, even though they are not to that same level, as a lot of the places or Napa calls for, we still are able to respond within 3 minutes to any location within the city. So, they are a great fire department. I have had personal experience with a fire department. My husband has had several medical incidents, and they are always there fast. They are always there before the ambulance, and they have everything they need right there. He had a stroke. They got him going. They were ready. They had already called the airport to have him sent up to Portland. I mean, it was amazing. How effective they are and how efficient they are. But they are running at a lower capacity than they really should be. So that is something that, people need to be aware of. And in this day and age, like Vanessa was saying, with the fire that we have to worry about, I think everybody, as soon as that wind blows out there, I think we're all just kind of remembering back to September 8th. So I think it's so important that we make sure, and we have fire prevention as well. So currently the city has a fire prevention person, neighborhood watch person, who comes out and helps neighborhoods and helps you learn how to keep your house safe. And they can call the city any time and get that help as to what they can do. So, it's on our radar. So it's really imperative that we keep what we have.
Yeah, that's a really great plug for our Firewise coordinator. If you are listening to this and you would like to create a Firewise community in your neighborhood, get in touch with our fire department and they can help you move forward on that.
Okay, thank you. Our next question, what are some of the goals that public safety has for the next 3 years?
Well, I will just step out and say that the reality is we're just really trying to stay stable. I mean, stability is very important. And because we have made a few cuts, and we know one of the things I think a lot of us are afraid of is the fact that they have right now they've lessened the for narcotics. Anyway, they've lessened some of the criminal activity, so that could increase criminal activity. We don't know. We don't know how that's going to impact us. They're getting ready to shut down enforce the Greenway, camping there. What impact will that have on us here? So we can look outside and see a lot of things coming, and I think it's imperative that we keep the services that we have now stable moving forward. So I think that's our major goal. I will say that I feel very honored that our police chief's number one goal, and he has stated it over and over, is to gain community trust by working with the community to make the community feel very comfortable. I will also say that all of our officers are trained in crisis intervention and de-escalation and negotiation skills. And those are some things that all of us watch now on the news. It's big. We were one of the very first fire departments to have body cams in the state of Oregon. So we have always picked ourselves up to a high level. And I think that is important. And I think that's what we'll be doing, is just to try to keep that stability and keep that trust within our community in our public safety.
All right, did anyone else want to add anything to that question?
So I can't speak for Chief Hensman in that leg of the public safety stool, but I would echo the stability sentiments. I believe the measure referring to is 110, and I've been following that closely because possession is now a ticket with a lower fine amount than a seatbelt violation or a speeding ticket. But And I track that to see, because that results in less criminal cases being referred. But so far, the total number referred hasn't changed, which means that while there are not possession of controlled substance crimes, there are still the crimes commonly associated with that being referred, which are shoplifting, other property crimes, some domestic violence is associated with that. So I anticipate that probably being more. I know overdoses are up, and I know that they respond to officers are sometimes they're the ones saving the lives of these people. I think they all carry Narcan still. Just generally as a county, and the major city, the biggest city in the county, is that after years of underfunding, and what I've seen, what Sheriff Daniel has done with that agency, and it's 20 hours of patrol, and there's no jail add on to the water bill, and if you commit a crime in Josephine County, you go to jail, hopefully so then don't do it anymore. Our office is almost completely staffed. For us to have all of that, and it's finally working, and all crimes with legal merit are being prosecuted, all of them are being charged, the city's responding to all calls for service, the county is referring twice as many cases as they were for the last decade. For all of that progress in the time that I've been here, stability and keeping that going, not necessarily increasing it, just stable, maintaining that rather than backsliding, because as I mentioned earlier, that backslide is not, it takes years to come back from a momentary backslide. So that's the goals from here. And in my budget presentation for next week, I had put maintain and retain. So that's kind of the goal, is maintain what we've worked so hard to get here in Josephine County.
Great, thank you. So it looks like that's all the questions I see. Is there any questions you wanted to add, Kate, before we move into closing comments?
Not at this time. I think we've covered quite a bit of ground. I am interested in closing comments.
Great. So we'll move into that. And Josh, if you want to kick it off with closing comments before we close out.
You make me go first? I was going to let them go, and then I'm going to let you say. I kind of just made mine. Status quo in city, and I think it's important to that minimum staffing. They respond to everything. They conduct investigations and everything, and the amount that they're expected to do while covering a beat and helping back up and do all of that. And when I answered adequate, and that minimum staffing is where we're at. And I didn't know the numbers on the cut, because that's a different entity than from where I'm at. But if it doesn't pass and it's 3 times what they've already cut, I can't imagine the changes that we would see and the city would see, and then the downward spiral that would create. Yeah, I don't think I have any others. The last one I just did was almost closing comments too. So
You did well.
You did. All right, Valerie, you want to go next?
Yeah, I'm just going to stand up and say, I've lived in this community for 40 years, and I've raised 4 of my children here. I've been a teacher here. My husband we have property, family, senior housing. And my husband sees those fire and police officers a couple times a week, and they are great. We kind of live in what we call an isolated community. If you live in Jacksonville and Medford's there, Central Point, you've kind of got this surrounded. But Grants Pass is kind of like on its own little island, and so we've had to raise up our level to a pretty good place. And that's why I say we were one of the first to have body cams. We've always been out in the community. I'm so proud as a school teacher that we still honor the officers in the schools. That gives the opportunity for kids to see a very positive and build positive relationships with public safety. I know that that's a value that a lot of us have and want to keep. I just know that they do respond, and they are excellent, and I don't want to lose that. It's something that I think we've always in this community prided ourselves on, is that we have a good public safety department. Our police and our fire work together. We work with the dispatch. You can call anytime and you know you're going to get help. They have worked to build those partnerships. I think working with Options in Mental Health, Women's Crisis Support Team. You know, they just currently started a program. I think it's called Coming Home, where if you come into the public safety department and bring any paraphernalia or any drugs and turn yourself in, there will be no charges, and they will help you get treatment. So over and over again, I've gone down to Riverside Park with one of the police officers, and I know, you know, we hear stories, but I mean, on a personal level, they knew every single person down there, and they were able to talk with them. They had a rapport with them. You know, they've driven them to services. They'll do whatever they can. So I just think that we need to value them by showing them through voting for this renewal that we appreciate what they do in our community.
Great. Thank you, Valerie and Vanessa. Do you want to move on with closing comments?
Yeah, I'd like to thank Josh and Valerie for being here tonight and spending your 80-degree afternoon with us here on this. And thank you to the Chamber so much for hosting this and giving us this platform to talk about how important this is. I really appreciate it. Thank you. I'd like to really hit home that this election this May, the $1.79 levy is a renewal. It will not be an increase to anybody's taxes. It is a rate that the community is already paying. It is a rate that the community has been paying since 2009. And our Department of Public Safety has been able to live within those means and provide us the services that we have come to adore. When we call 911, someone answers the phone. When someone has a medical emergency, fire shows up. When there is domestic violence, the police are there, along with Women's Crisis Support Team. And when someone is having substance abuse issues, they're able to be lodged in the sobering center rather than taking up space in the jail, where potentially someone who committed a violent crime should be housed. So this renewal allows us to continue moving forward with those services and allowing our Department of Public Safety professionals to do what they love and continue to serve their community. So please vote yes on 1797.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Josh, Valerie, and Vanessa. This was very informative. And just a reminder to the audience, the ballots are being mailed today, so you should be getting it anytime. And we really appreciate you taking the time to educate yourself on these measures. This is recorded, so it will be available on the Chamber's Facebook page, our YouTube channel, and also our website, which is grantspasschamber.org. And also a big thank you to Kate for also joining us and asking the questions.
And I would just like to add that if there are more questions or you have something that you're concerned about, you can contact Vanessa or myself at Grants Pass at the city website. You just simply need to go to Mayor and Council under contacts, and you can let us know what you want to know, and we'll give you more information.
Great. Thank you all so much, and I hope everyone has a great night.
All right.
Thank
you.
Thank you, Josie.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Bye.